Welcome to the Halls of Justice. Today we are going to talk about international law. And Judge Cunningham III, it's all yours.
No, I think we were just picking up on our discussions from our last week's show, just doing a comparative analysis. What happens to people when they're abroad, and particularly some of our younger people who tend to travel quite a bit and don't recognize that the rights that you have here that are constitutional here in the United States, when you leave the United States, those same rights don't apply internationally.
You leave them behind.
Right. And we were talking about the appellate process as your experience in Italy relative to the Amanda Fox case, and you were talking about generally how the appellate courts do some new fact-finding.
Yes, in the appellate process, it's essentially a new trial. In fact, in this case, the judge took the appeal, and his opening statement was, the only thing we know is that the victim is dead. So he was not taking anything from the previous trial. It is essentially a retrial. And the judge in the Italian system, rarely do they ever remand a case back for retrial. The place for redress of a problem is in the appeal. And in Italy, 50% of all felonies are reversed in appeal.
So you get really basically two bites at the apple then, in the Italian system.
You do. You get two bites of the apple, and in fact, until you get to go to the Supreme Court, but that's more like our appellate system here, our usual appellate system. But in Italy, you are not considered convicted until you have exhausted your appeals. For instance, the prosecutor who is prosecuting Amanda's appeal has been convicted of abuse of power and putting innocent people in jail. He's been convicted and sentenced to prison. But he is allowed to prosecute Amanda Knox because he still has an appeal left to go.
So in our system, when a person is accused of a crime, there's a presumption of innocence. Does that exist in that system, to your knowledge?
It's kind of funny because there really isn't a presumption of innocence there. Yet, if you're convicted, there is.
That sort of turns it on its head then, doesn't it?
Because the prosecutions so often result in convictions there, and they are so often overturned. So it is hard to say, for instance, when Amanda Knox was arrested, she wasn't given bail, essentially what we would call bail, because she refused to apologize for the murder to the parents of the victim. Well, she said she didn't have anything to do with the murder, so apologizing to the parents would be a very bad thing to do.
In our system, it could be construed as an admission.
As an admission, yes, sir. And so she didn't do that, and therefore they said because she showed no remorse for the crime, she was going to stay in jail until the trial for a year, or 2 years it turned out. But that's an assumption of guilt. And yet at the same time, the prosecutor who's prosecuting her now was convicted of malfeasance and abusing the rights of the innocent, yet he, after his conviction, he is still allowed to prosecute because he hasn't completed his appeals and therefore is considered not really guilty.
This is amazing. So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Attorneys in the United States, okay, if they're convicted of something and they're found guilty, can they still practice? I mean,
no.
See, that's what I'm thinking here. So, gentlemen, don't look at me like this. I'm representing the Housewives of America.
Very well. Very well.
So, number one, if she would have apologized and been released, had she had said, and that's the other thing, let's say students need to be well versed in Italian protocol when they go to another country and what they expect of you. All right, so if she would have said, like I said, even if she said, you know, I had nothing to do with the murder of your daughter. However, I am so sorry. I am very sorry that this occurred, that this happened. Could she have gone and been released then?
I don't think so. I think the fix was in on this one.
Oh, that's sad.
And again, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth or come to conclusions. I know the judge is very careful not to come to any conclusion, make any statement like that, and I don't want to get even close to that.
And I want to know too, okay, we covered this on the other show. Why didn't she have counsel? I mean, is this part of the Italian system and the protocol? Aren't you assigned counsel right away? Or should I say that? Am I going to get in trouble for that?
She asked for an attorney and was not provided one. They told her that an attorney would only make it more problematic for her. And so she was...
Hear that, Bill? No.
And so she believed them. She thought that if they said she doesn't need an attorney, then she must not need an attorney. And in fact, the Italian Supreme Court threw out everything she said in the confession after a certain point, because once you become a suspect, you're required to have representation, and they didn't give it to her at all.
No, it's interesting because, again, this is a point that's so distinct in certainly our judicial system, because it has been as a result of decisions from our U.S. Supreme Court within the past 50 years or so, where you were expressly, if you are an indigent person in a criminal case, you are entitled to be appointed counsel. But that's a decision that arose from U.S. Supreme Court decisions, and
Yes.
It's the evolution of our law that tries to put those protections in place. That, again, I keep going back to reminding people, when you leave the United States jurisdiction, all of those decisions and authority and practices and customs don't necessarily apply.
You're absolutely right, and I can remember doing interviews and interrogations when I was an FBI agent, and if the person even used the word lawyer, I was concerned that I couldn't even go on. If they asked, do I need a lawyer? I was this close to the end of the interview right then, I knew, because I'm not going to tell them they don't need a lawyer. And once they say, I think I want to speak to a lawyer, it's over.
Right.
The conversation is over. You make them comfortable, you get them a sandwich, you get them a Coke, and then you go help them get their lawyer. This is different overseas.
I have another question, and I don't want to get in trouble, but upon your statement that once she did have an attorney come in from the Italian government, all of the admissions that she had said, it was thrown out?
She did not get an attorney.
Oh, she didn't? Okay, wait a minute. What happened then? Who's representing her, and how did everything get thrown out? And shouldn't that have helped her case? That was my question.
Yes.
Shouldn't that help?
Yes, and this is going to be something that it's hard to explain, but she was not given an attorney she was interrogated 50 some hours over the course of 5 days.
Okay.
The last 8 hours were from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which I don't think you could get away with in the United States unless you had exigent circumstances. But when this interrogation and the results of it were brought before the Italian Supreme Court, they said, this is inadmissible. You have completely overrode this person's rights.
And they threw that out.
They threw that out. However,
Okay.
in Italy, you have civil cases and criminal cases that run concurrently. So at the same time that she was being tried for murder,
So it's like OJ? Okay, go ahead.
different. At the same time she was being tried for murder, she was also being sued. It's like that, except it happened at the same time. So she was also already being sued by the victim's parents. So while they couldn't use the statement for the criminal trial, they read it into record in front of the same jury as part of the civil trial.
Okay.
So the same jury heard the same information.
What were the parents suing her for?
Which I would say in an American jurisdiction, you would have definitely a different jury in a civil case
Yes, sir.
than you would in a criminal case. They would not be the
that's-
same jury. It absolutely would not be, because you have different burdens of proof, you have different statutory protections, you have different procedural and constitutional protections, and it's just an understanding of how different the laws develop in different jurisdictions, and the importance of certainly defending the rights we have in our great nation.
Oh yeah, and the more the less powerful the person, the more they need the help of the state, which is something I wouldn't have said 20 years ago at the FBI, being always wanting to prosecute. But so
What were the parents suing her for?
the parents were suing her for wrongful death. They were suing all the suspects for wrongful death.
So they sued everybody, not just her.
Everybody.
Okay.
And so they got a judgment of something like 21 million euros against Amanda's family and the other person's family.
How much is that in U.S. dollars?
Exchange
double
rate, something
it.
like $30 million.
Yeah.
And Amanda's family is essentially bankrupt because of the trying to defend her. They weren't rich to begin with. Her boyfriend, who they convicted, his family is wealthy, and so
The one that threw her under the bus, yeah. Okay. But anyway, but they sued him.
Yes.
They sued, what's his name, Rudy?
Rudy.
And they sued the club owner.
Rudy is indigent, and the club owner sued Amanda.
The club owner sued Amanda?
Yes, because the police got her to sign a statement saying that he was at the crime scene after 56 hours of interrogation. Amanda never confessed. Everybody says, well, Amanda confessed. No, she didn't. What she said is, okay, my boss was at the crime scene.
Wow.
And they arrested the boss immediately. And then when the DNA evidence came back from the victim's body, it wasn't the boss, and they had a problem. You see where we're going with this?
I guess, but the problem is, see, kids do the darndest things. So, wink louder, no.
But
You're dating yourself.
At this point, if it was my kid, I really liked art. Though. I mean, I was
met him once too.
Oh, really? See, I like you.
On a shuttle coming back and forth from LAX, he didn't use a limousine, and this was within he died a couple years ago. But you just catch the shuttle like everyone else. So
Oh, yeah.
when I was talking to him, I said, "God, you're what I've always wanted to do."
But okay, so now we're back to when they were trying to say that the reason why the Italian government, they weren't feeling any sympathy for Amanda was because they said she lied. So is this part of the lie that they were talking about?
This is the lie they're talking about. And the reason we have the Fifth Amendment, you have the right to remain silent. Do you know why that's in there? Because of things like the Salem witch trials. Do you believe in witches?
No.
Do you know how many of those women said they were witches after interrogation? That's the problem. If you get an interrogation that's long enough, that's aggressive enough, people will say anything. These women with children who knew they were going to die if they said that they were witches, said they were witches, just to make the interrogation end.
Now, see, this is where we differ, because I'm a real strong woman, and I disagree with that. I know that there are extenuating circumstances in some people in some areas, but I'm real strong in certain areas, and no. But if you get a weak person, and if they're scared, and if they feel like, okay, this is where I'm going to go.
Like a 20-year-old girl in a being interrogated all night in Italian when she doesn't speak Italian, being told she's going to be there for 30 years because they have evidence that you murdered your roommate.
So was the boss there, or wasn't he there?
The boss?
Her boss, was he there or not there? See, that's where...
The boss wasn't there. They found evidence that led them to believe that a man of color had committed the crime.
And that was Rudy.
Her boss was a man of color. And he was the one that they immediately set to. So they didn't ask her to say she did it. They interrogated her for 56 hours, asking her, telling her, slapping her when she didn't say it. It's your boss, wasn't it? It's your boss, wasn't it? And so they arrested the one man of color that they knew in that town, the bar owner. And then when the DNA came back and it wasn't him, they had a problem because the prosecutor was already under indictment for doing this same thing to other people.
But see, that fact pattern and your question just emphasizes the importance of having procedural protections.
Yes.
Because it shouldn't, when you use the power of the state, whether that's the state of California, the federal government, or some other even international entity, when you have that